Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Judy. In today's video, we're gonna draw this hair together step by step. You can follow this tutorial as you're watching the video, and later you can send me your drawing on Instagram. I'm gonna give you my honest opinion and maybe tell you how you can improve it. I'm gonna show you two different techniques to draw this hair and have the same results, and I'm gonna only use two important pencils, so let's start. I like to start sketching with a mechanical pencil just because I like using a mechanical pencil when sketching. So I'm gonna start by the basic shape of the head and the bun. So two circles, don't have to be perfect of course, and this line. So that line you're seeing right now is the one that will guide me through drawing the braid. Some people might think that drawing the braid is kind of complicated. I might have to disagree with you. I don't have any special technique to draw a braid, I just wing it, and this is what I'm here to teach you. Because you don't need any guidelines to draw a braid, it's pretty simple, and you're only drawing two lines, like two lines at a time, connect them together, there's your braid. So you just feel how you can draw the braid. So I started with smaller lines, and now I'm making them bigger as I'm moving down, and eventually I'm gonna make them smaller because it's the end of the braid. And I think it's very obvious in the video what's my technique. It's just two lines at a time, and the results are pretty satisfying in my opinion, so don't overthink it, you know. Now the head shape is very important, and you're gonna see me correct it more than one time because I can do that until I am satisfied with it and I want it to look as realistic as possible. So it's gonna be like flat in the middle and kind of circly in the back. You're gonna see later. And for the bun, it's a messy bun, so you don't have to follow that exactly, and most of these lines won't make sense right now because they're not shaded, but once we shade it, they're gonna make a lot of sense. So of course, you don't have to make sense out of hair. It's messy, it's hair. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to follow this exactly, of course. You can do your own messy bun. But this is just a reference, right? So yeah, I'm just gonna keep working with that head shape and delete my guidelines because I don't need them anymore. And yeah, when you're satisfied with the total shape of the hair or the how it looks, you can then move on to working more on it, adding more details, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm gonna add hair strands because one of the most important techniques when drawing hair is dividing it to something smaller. So it could be overwhelming to draw something that big, so what we do is just divide it into smaller things to just deal with each part individually, and that helps us control it better, you know. I'm just gonna add the neck and kind of a body and half a face just for a reference to the girl I'm drawing. I'm not gonna shade that because this video is only about hair, but you are free to shade it later if you like. Maybe add eyebrows and eyelashes, it's up to you, of course. We don't have to do that because we're gonna cover most of our face with hair, and her ear of course is also covered, so yeah. And as I said before, I'm gonna keep correcting this head shape until I'm satisfied with it, which is what's so great about drawing with pencils, and I can finally say that I am okay with it now. Okay, so I'm gonna start shading with a 2B pencil. The brand isn't important, whatever you have. This is kind of light shade, you know, and I'm finally satisfied with everything I've done so far, so I'm going over my lines one more time because this is gonna get shaded big time. So what's my shading technique here? Lines. You're drawing hair, right? It's a bunch of lines. I'm gonna start with the darkest areas, which are where the hair starts and where it ends. Let's call them the corners because I don't have a better word for that. But yeah, I start with the darkest areas. Bunch of lines. I can control my hand pressure to get it darker. then the middle, I'm gonna leave the middle for the highlights. Of course, I'm gonna show you two different techniques to show good highlights, but for now, leave it lighter than the corners. Of course, you're gonna draw few hairs in the middle. Of course, it's not fully white, but let's keep it whiter or lighter than the corners. And notice how I just moved to another hair strand. So this is how useful it is to divide your hair into sections. It's so much easier to deal with each section individually. And keep in mind that not every section or every hair strand has the same amount of highlights, so I might not leave the same amount of highlights in the middle. Some of them might be darker than others, some of them might have more exposure, so we're gonna see with the shading process, but for now you can just follow what I'm doing. Now I'm gonna use my second pencil. It's a 10B pencil. So whenever you see me using a silver pencil, this is the 10B pencil, and when you see me using a black pencil, this is the 2B pencil. Of course, you don't have to use such a dark shade. You can use anything darker than your initial pencil. You know, just pick two shades. One of them is lighter and one of them is darker. In case you don't have 10B, you can use 6B. 6B is very good for this, and 2B and 6B are very good at this. Okay, so I'm going over the same thing I did with my 2B pencil. I'm just going over my initial lines, my dark lines, also avoiding the middle for the highlight. But I bet you can see that this looks so much better already. That's because I'm building layers, so that's the important thing. And I'm blending with a brush, or also you can blend with Q-tips. It's up to you. So whenever I'm blending, it's either a brush or a Q-tip. But this is about building layers. So when blending, I'm not avoiding the middle anymore. I want the middle to get shaded because you can't just leave it white. So just by blending, I go over the middle and I just give it a little color, right? And it's all about, as I said before, building layers. So shade, blend, shade again, blend again. So this is the process we're going. And now just like gently going over the middle, because it has to have some lines or some hairs. It shouldn't be just white, but lightly, so I wouldn't erase the highlights I already created by avoiding the area. It still looks lighter than the corners, but not as strong as I want it to be, so I'm using my mono zero eraser to have the strong highlights that I'm looking for. Of course, if you don't have the mono zero eraser, you can use any small eraser. I used to use the erasers that come with pencils, you know, at the tip of your pencil. Make them sharp and you can do the exact same thing. So you can't go wrong with drawing hair. You're just gonna have to keep adding lines and lines and adding highlights until you're satisfied with the results. So I'm going over it again with my 2B pencil, then adding a little 10B wouldn't hurt anybody, just to get the idea I have in mind. You know, I have no reference for this, so just about how I feel about it, you know. And I think it goes without saying, but keep your pencils sharp when drawing hair. It's essential here. That's why I like to use a mechanical pencil for hair, because I don't have to sharpen it every 2 seconds. So yeah. And don't forget to do the most fun thing to do here is just draw random hairs around the very neat shape of hair you've just drawn. Yeah, to make it look more realistic. Now off to my second technique. I'm gonna be using this weird tool. This is the dotting tool used in nail art. They use it to make dots. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna engrave the paper, and this would give us very good highlights without having to avoid the highlighted areas, and you're gonna see that in a minute. Of course, this technique is very useful, but it's not very necessary. especially when drawing with pencils, because pencils are pretty easy to handle and then pretty easy to erase later to make highlights that you can shade the entire area and then erase it later. It's pencils, it's easy. But using this technique with charcoal, for example, is very useful and will save you a lot of time, and this is my go-to technique when using charcoal. But with pencils, I don't use it generally. I'm just here to show you an option in case maybe you don't have the mono zero eraser and you think this is easier for you. It's up to you, but it will give us some naturally good highlights even if we don't erase it. So it won't give you the strong highlights you want, but it will give you some pretty decent highlights. And as I told you before, this technique isn't very important with pencils, it's very good with charcoal. So I'm not gonna finish this drawing using this technique. No, I'm gonna go back to my old technique, but I just showed you the option. And you can see that even though I didn't use an eraser, there are some pretty good highlights here. So this could be a good option for you. It's up to you, of course. You can shade the whole area in, then go over with a light pencil, of course, with the 2B, and then with the 10B, the corners, go over the corners and blend again, and you will have some decent highlights. But of course, just because I want some really good highlights and I want it to match the first part I did, I'm gonna later go over it with an eraser. But even if you have an eraser and you did this technique, it will be so much easier to erase it just because it has less graphite on it because it's engraved, if you know what I mean. So it's a good technique. I can't say it's not, but I just want to say that it's better with charcoal than pencils. And as I said before, not every part has the same highlights. So as you can see down there, I just shaded a whole area in with my 10B just straight ahead, just because I know I want to add any highlights. I just want it like pitch black, so I just got it over with and then moved back to my original strand and kept working on that. Now, what's the difference between using Q-tips for blending and using brushes? Because sometimes you're gonna see me using Q-tips and sometimes I'm gonna be using brushes. Well, here it doesn't make a lot of difference because it's just hair, but when drawing portraits it could be different. So the idea is that Q-tips work the same as blending stumps, if you know what these are. These are great for small details, like small areas, and they don't erase much of the details you added. You can keep them or you can make details with them, if that makes sense, especially blending stumps, because they have a sharp tip and you can make details with that. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. However, brushes are great for blending large areas and they give smoother results. So when drawing portraits, I prefer using brushes because the skin, for example, will look flawless, but when I add details for that skin, for example, when I add skin pores, I will use a Q-tip or a blending stump, you know. But here, since it's hair, it doesn't have that. I don't need it to be smooth, so I don't care if I use this or that. That's why I said you can use either Q-tip or a brush, because it doesn't matter really. So I just wanted to explain that. I love adding highlights, to be honest. I love using this eraser. This must be my favorite tool. So I keep adding highlights over the areas I've already done because it's pencil and it could, like, graphite will get on it again and again. I just keep to update these highlights. So you're gonna see me just going over the same highlights over and over again whenever I find this eraser in my hand. And I will keep adding just some random hairs just because I just can't do whatever I want here. There is no rule, as I said before, so I can go over it forever. Now moving on to the braid. Drawing the braid or shading the braid is fun and all, but it's repetitive. Like you're gonna do the exact same thing for every single one of them, and they're already kind of divided, so you have how many sections? I can't count that, but you get the idea. So I started by just layering a base layer of graphite. So you can see that I'm not following one technique. So here I just felt like, okay, I'm gonna shade it very lightly first and not just start with the corners, and or not corners here, they're not corners, but you know, the dark areas with lines. So it's just hair, so I know it's eventually gonna get shaded, so I felt like, okay, I'm gonna shade it in. And I want to apologize in advance, but my hand will be blocking most of that just because I don't know how I draw, and I'm gonna position my camera differently next time, but this is gonna be blocked for a while, but I promise you that I will move my hand later. And the good news is that, as I said before, this is a repetitive process, so I'm gonna be repeating the same thing for every single one of them. So I'm gonna speed up the process here, and then you'll see it kind of slow down later. But don't worry about these for now, because later you will see the slowed version and it's the exact same process, so don't worry. Okay, thank God I finally noticed that you can't see a thing. So I finally moved my hand. I'm sorry, I'm left-handed, guys, so you can't blame me, you can't. So as you can see, the base layer, we already saw that. And then with my mechanical pencil, I don't know why, it's just, I just picked it up. But you can use the 2B pencil, of course, do the dark areas, some lines, you know, it's the same exact process. So, and then of course with the dark pencil, go over it again and blend that, add highlights, blend again, and you'll get the final results. Of course, build up layers, always build up layers. And my goal here is to make the braid kind of popped. You know what I mean? Like it's not at the same level as the rest of the hair. It should be like above it. So what I'm doing when I'm doing the highlights is very important, because I am positioning the highlights around the edges of the braid, not the inside. I'm adding more highlights around the edges just to differentiate it from the hair under it, you know. So on the right side, I'm doing highlights on the right, closer to the right, and on the left side, I'm doing the highlights closer to the left, if that makes sense. And you can see that clearly in the video. I just wanted to explain it, why I did that, why I didn't just do the highlights in the middle. So I kind of want to make it look obviously like it's a different thing, it's a different level. So you can do that with highlights. And as much as I try to be like very careful not to smudge the paper, it happens. Even though I have a paper below my hand, but I always keep cleaning the paper with the kneaded eraser just to not have any like mess. But yeah, try to keep the paper as clean as possible. Always place a paper below your hand. Now this is a trickier part because you're gonna draw the hair below the braid, as we said before. You're gonna make sure that you don't ruin what you've already done. Like you have to avoid that braid. You don't want to mess it up. So be very careful with that. Try to stay clear of the braid. Of course, you have to fill it up. You have to make it darker than the braid because, as I said before, it's below it. But make sure that you don't mess up the work you've already done. Be very careful. Be very patient with it. And it's fine in case you mess up, just add highlights again. So as I said before, I'm gonna try to differentiate the braid from what's under it. So I just gonna keep adding highlights on the right side here just to make it clear that this is up and this is down, or this is the upper part and this is how to explain this. Explaining art is very hard for me. Like I would like to teach art, but it's not easy, so I'm learning on YouTube if you'll allow me. And I really appreciate that. But I know that you know what I mean. Like, it's very clear from the video. Now, the vision I had for this part is layers. So I'm basically gonna make it look like it's layered, and each layer is tucked in the braid somehow. So the upper layer should be kind of lighter than the layer below it. So you're gonna see that clearly in the shading, but I just wanted to tell you what I had in mind and how I am executing my vision. So as you can see, the sections I've drawn are just the layers, and I think you can picture the idea. And I just want to add something. I said before that I'm gonna divide it into hair strands or sections just to deal with everyone in each one of them individually, but that doesn't mean that you have to have the end result like individual hair strands, because hair is just hair. It's not divided. Basically, you can see highlights and shadows, but it's not divided. So whenever you do hair strands, eventually they're gonna get blended together, and you're gonna make sure that you do that. Of course, not 100% because there are different values here, but eventually your initial outlines will be gone because we blended that and made it into one. And here I must say that I've done a little mistake because this looks weird and I only noticed this after I started editing or after I finished, so it was too late to fix it. But don't do that. It looks weird because it looks like it's out of nowhere, this little thingy. So just tuck it in. You don't have to make it pointy like that. And here again, I have to apologize in advance because the camera stopped filming me drawing these extra hairs, the you know. So yeah, that's not here. So what I'm doing is I'm just gonna explain it on a separate paper after I finish the whole thing. So it's the same thing. You can follow what you're seeing in the finished drawing, and just all of them have the same technique obviously, and it's honestly the same technique that I've been doing all along. So but the difference is I'm not using any dark pencil, maybe just a little bit, like very little touches, but I'm mostly using the mechanical pencil or the light pencil, just because these hairs should be lighter, or should be light, because there is no depth into them. They're just very thin hairs that's falling out. So yeah. And again, don't forget to draw the messy tiny hairs between them. And that's it. I really hope you found that useful because I feel like only 3 people watch my videos. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe, leave a like and a comment. Thank you.